Hi, 5th graders. Welcome to Lesson 7.4, Multiply Fractions. The essential question for this lesson is, how can you use an area model to show the product of two fractions? Now, go ahead and open up your Go Math workbook to Lesson 7.4, found on page 151, and let's get started. Now, let's take a look at question number 4. For question 4, they tell us to find the product and to draw a model. So we're going to use an area model to help us multiply the fractions 3/4 and 1/3. Now our first step is going to be this. We need to first of all draw a rectangle. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I want you guys to do the same thing. So we're going to go ahead and set up a rectangle right here. Now our rectangle's in place. Now our next step is going to be this. We're going to divide that rectangle into 3 equal columns. And the reason we're going to divide it into 3 equal columns is because the denominator of that second factor is a 3. So let's go ahead and divide that rectangle into 1, 2, 3 equal columns. Now, once again, those 3 equal columns, 1, 2, 3, represent that 3 that's the denominator in the second factor. Now, our next step is going to be this. To represent the entire factor 1/3, what we now need to do is we're going to shade one of those 3 columns because our numerator is a 1. Let's go ahead and shade in one of those 3 columns. So I'm going to go ahead and shade here. And we're going to once again shade in one of the 3 columns. So we now have 1/3 of our rectangle shaded in. Now our next step is going to be this. We now need to divide the rectangle into 4 equal rows. And the reason we're going to do that is because there is a 4 as the denominator in that first factor, 3/4. So let's go ahead and we're now going to divide that rectangle into 4 equal rows. I'm going to start out by drawing a line right here in the middle. So there's one, and then I'm going to draw another line here and another line here. So now, once again, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 equal rows. Now, that first factor is the fraction 3/4. So that 3, as the numerator tells me, then I need to now shade in 3/4 of the 1/3 that we've already shaded. So I'm going to choose a different color, and I'm going to go ahead and shade in 3 of those 1/3 that we've already shaded in. So here's 1. I'm going to go ahead and shade in 1, 2, 3 of those 1/3 pieces that we've already shaded. Now our next step is going to be this. We're now going to count how many of those smaller rectangles contain both types of shading. So what we know is this. I know that there's 1, 2, 3 of our smaller rectangles that have both the blue and the green shaded in. So what that means is that means that 3 becomes our numerator. So I'm going to go ahead and write the 3 down as the numerator. And now our next step is going to be this. We're now going to count the total number of rectangles within the larger rectangle. So I know that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that means that 12 is going to become the denominator. So what I know is this. 3/4 times the fraction 1/3 is going to equal the product of 3/12. Now, the thing about the fraction 3/12 is this. We know that we can simplify because we know that we can divide both a 3 and a 12 by 3. And when we do that, 3 divided by 3 is going to give us a 1. And then we also know that 12 divided by 3 is going to give us 4. So in simplest form, our product now becomes 1/4. Now, let's take a look at question number 6. For question 6, they give us 3/5 times 3/5. Now, once again, we're going to use the area model to help us find the product. Our first step is going to be this once again. We're going to draw a rectangle. So right now, along with me, I want you guys to go ahead and draw a rectangle for me. So here's our rectangle. Now, once we have that rectangle in place, here's what we need to look at. We need to now look at the denominator of that second factor, which is a 5. And what that tells us is we're now going to divide that rectangle into 5 equal columns. So let's go ahead and we're going to start to draw. So here we go. Here's 1, 2, 3. Now we have 4 and 5. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equal columns, and that represents the 5 that's the denominator in that second factor. Now our numerator here is a 3. So what that means is we now need to shade in 3 of those 5 columns, and that's going to represent our 3/5. So let's go ahead and begin to shade in. So once again, we're going to shade in 3 of those columns. So let's go ahead and begin our shading. So we've got 3 of those columns now shaded in. And once again, this now represents that second factor, which is 3/5. Now, our next step is going to be this. We now need to divide our rectangle into 5 equal rows because our first factor also has 5 as the denominator. So we're going to go ahead and we're now going to divide that into 5 equal rows. So let's go ahead and begin here, and we're going to go ahead and start to draw. So here's 1. Let me change that color back so we can see it a little easier. Here's 1, 2, 3. Now we have 4 and 5. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 equal rows. Now, in order to show that first factor, which is 3/5, I now need to go ahead and shade in 3/5 of the 3/5 we've already shaded. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a different color, and I'm going to go ahead and begin to shade in, and here we go. So we're going to shade in 3 of the 3/5 that are already shaded. So here's 1, 2, 3 of the 3/5 that we've already shaded. Now our next step is going to be this. We now need to count the number of rectangles that have both types of shading. Let's go ahead and make a count and see how many have both the blue and the green. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So what that tells me is, it tells me that 9 is going to be our numerator. So we're going to go ahead and write that 9 down as the numerator. Now our next step is going to be this. We now need to count the total number of rectangles within the larger rectangle. So let's go ahead and make our count. I know that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rectangles going across, and I know that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 running up and down. I know that 5 times 5 is going to give me 25, so there's a total of 25 rectangles, smaller rectangles within the larger rectangle. So that tells me that 3/5 times 3/5 gives me a product of 9/25. Now, with the fraction 9/25, we can't simplify. There's not a number that goes into both a 9 and a 25, so we're going to go ahead and circle that 9/25, and that is our product. Now, let's take a look at question number 7. It's one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and it says, Nora has a piece of ribbon that is 3/4 yard long. She will use 1/2 of it to make a bow. What length of ribbon will she use for the bow? So what we know we have is this. We know that Nora has a piece of ribbon that is 3/4 yard long. She will use 1/2 of it to make a bow. So in order to find the length of ribbon she'll use for the bow, we have to find 1/2 of the fraction 3/4. Now remember, we've talked about that little word of, and that little word of just represents multiplication. Now, in order to solve this problem, we're going to use our area model once again. So I'm going to start out first of all by drawing a rectangle. So let's go ahead and draw the rectangle together. Alright, so here's our rectangle. Now I'm going to go to that second factor, which is 3/4. And I'm going to focus on that denominator, which is a 4. And what that 4 tells me is I need to divide my rectangle into 4 equal columns. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to divide it into 4 equal columns. So draw a line down the middle, and then cut that in half, and cut it in half again. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4 equal columns that represent the 4 that is our denominator. Now let's go back up and look at the numerator, which is a 3. That 3 tells us we now need to shade in 3 of those 4 columns. So we're going to go ahead and begin to shade, and I want you to do the same thing. We're going to shade in 3 out of those 4 columns. So we now have represented the fraction 3/4. Now I'm going to go back to that first factor, which is a 1/2. And I know that my denominator here is a 2. So what that means is I now need to divide my rectangle into 2 equal rows. So I'm going to just draw one line right down the middle, dividing that rectangle into 1, 2 equal rows. Now, my numerator is a 1. So what that means is I'm now going to shade in 1/2 of the 3/4 that we've already shaded. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a different color, and we're now going to shade in 1/2 of the already shaded 3/4. So let's go ahead and begin to shade here. And I'm just going to shade in 1/2 of the 3/4 that we've already shaded. Now our next step is going to be this. We now need to count how many of our rectangles, the smaller rectangles, have both the blue and the green shading in them. So our count is 1, 2, 3. 3 of our rectangles have both the blue and the green shaded in. So I know that that 3 is going to become our numerator. Now our next step is to count how many smaller squares there are altogether, and that's going to become the denominator. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 smaller rectangles. So that 8 now becomes our denominator. So what that tells me is 1/2 times 3/4 gives us a product of 3/8. And with the product 3/8, I can't simplify, so we're going to go ahead and circle that, and we're going to say that she needs 3/8 yard of ribbon to make the bow. Now let's take a look at question number 8. It's another one of our real-world problem-solving questions, and it says, Marlon bought 7/8 pound of turkey at the deli. He used 2/3 of it to make sandwiches for lunch. How much of the turkey did Marlon use for sandwiches? So what we know is this. We know that Marlon bought 7/8 pound of turkey at the deli, and he used 2/3 of it to make sandwiches. So in order to find how much of the turkey Marlon used for sandwiches, our problem becomes we have to find 2/3 of 7/8. Now remember, once again, that little word of just represents multiplication. So we're going to once again use our area model to help us find the product of this problem. Now I'm going to start out by once again drawing a rectangle, and I want you guys to go ahead and draw the rectangle as well. So here's our rectangle. Now we're going to go back to that second factor in our problem, which is 7/8. Now 8 is the denominator, which means we have to now divide our rectangle into 8 equal columns. And because 7 is the numerator, we then have to shade in 7 of those 8 columns. So I'm going to ask you to pause your video, and I want you guys to go ahead and divide your rectangle into 8 equal columns, and then I want you to shade in 7 of those columns to represent the factor 7/8. So go ahead and pause the video now, and we'll check together in just a minute. Now your model should look like mine. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 equal columns, and we've shaded in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those columns. And once again, that represents that second factor, which is 7/8. Now we're going to go back to that first factor, which is 2/3. So what I know is this, that 3 tells me that I now need to divide our rectangle into 3 equal rows, and the 2 tells me that I need to shade in 2 of those rows. So we're going to shade in 2/3 of our 7/8. So in just a minute, we're going to pause that video, and I want you guys to divide your rectangle into 3 equal rows, and then we're going to shade in 2 of those. So go ahead and pause your video, and we'll check to see if your model matches mine in just a minute. Now, here's what your model will look like when you shaded in 2/3 of the 7/8 that we've already shaded. So once again, we divided that into 1, 2, 3 equal rows because 3 is our denominator, and we've shaded in 2/3 of the 7/8. So here's 1, 2 of those thirds of the 7/8 we'd already shaded in. Now our next step is going to be this. We now need to make our count. So we need to see how many of those smaller rectangles have both the blue and the green shaded in. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that tells us that 14 is going to become our numerator. So we'll write the 14 down as our numerator. Now our next step is to count how many total smaller rectangles there are within that larger rectangle. And what I know is this. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rectangles running across, and there's 1, 2, 3 rectangles running up and down. I know that 8 times 3 is going to give me 24, so that tells me that 24 is going to become our denominator. So what I know is 2/3 of 7/8 gives me the product of 14/24. Now when I look at these two numbers, what I know is they're both even numbers. So that tells me that I know that I can divide both of those numbers by 2 to simplify. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to divide by 2, and I know that 14 divided by 2 is going to give me 7. So I'm going to write down 7 as my numerator. And I know that 24 divided by 2 is going to give me 12. So I'm going to make that 12 my denominator. So in simplest form, our fraction becomes 7/12. So we know that he used 7/12 pound of turkey to make the sandwiches. Now your homework for tonight will be to complete question number 1 and question number 2, as well as numbers 3 through 6 found in your Go Math workbook on page 152. Don't forget, somewhere on your homework page, I want you to assess yourself. Do you feel like you're number 1 a novice, number 2 an apprentice, number 3 a practitioner, or number 4 an expert? Don't forget, your homework assignment is to complete question number 1, as well as number 2, along with numbers 3 through 6 found in your Go Math workbook on page 152. We hope you have a great evening and we look forward to seeing you at school tomorrow.